Have you ever noticed how, even when everything seems to be silent around you, your mind keeps making noise, as if there were a constant, repetitive, tiring dialogue? Thoughts that come back, worries that don't turn off, fears that arise without warning. And the more you try to control it, the more it seems to escape. It's like lying down to rest, but feeling inside that something never really turns off. A restlessness that does not scream, but he also never shuts up. And then time seems to drag on in those moments. The hours pass, but the mind remains stuck in the same place, reliving situations, anticipating problems, creating scenarios that don't even exist yet. The heart tightens for no clear reason, the chest becomes heavy, and a silent question begins to echo. Why is it so hard to find peace, even when everything is apparently fine? It is at this point that many get used to this state, as if it were normal to live like this, as if there was no real way out. But there is something that almost no one realizes, something that has always been accessible, but has been forgotten over time. A kind of spiritual key that is not hidden in distant places, but that remains invisible to those who live distracted. A secret that crosses generations, present in the scriptures, in the words of Jesus, and in the stories of men and women who faced deep pain. But they carried a peace that made no sense to the world. What if this peace were not a distant dream? What if there was a real way to silence this internal noise, not for a few minutes but steadily? A peace that does not depend on news, people, or circumstances, but that it is born from something much deeper. Jesus declared in John 14:27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives." There is a difference, and that difference changes everything. There is a way. It is not common. It is not taught in the right way, but it works. It's closer than it seems, hidden in something simple, almost ignored, as a spiritual code that few really understand. And today, something is going to be revealed here, not as a theory, but as a living truth. If you stay until the end, something inside you will start to change, perhaps even today. And along this journey, you will begin to realize that what seemed impossible to control within you can indeed be transformed. Each step will reveal deep layers of the peace that God desires to place in your mind, not as something distant, but as a practical reality. You will understand how David found rest even though he was persecuted, how Paul kept his mind steady inside a prison, and how Jesus remained in total control even in the most intense moments of his life. These are not old stories, they are living paths. As you continue, something begins to line up inside, as if each word is touching exactly where you need it most. Philippians 4:7 says, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." And perhaps, without realizing it, this peace is already starting to approach now. And it is exactly here that something begins to change silently, almost imperceptibly, because the mind at peace is not born of an external effort, but of an internal decision that few really understand. To trust God, absolutely. It's not a trust based on what you see, nor what you feel, but on what you choose to believe, even when everything around you seems uncertain. Because deep down, what steals peace the most are not the problems themselves. It is the need to have control over everything. Abraham was placed exactly at this point. God asked him to go out, leave behind what was safe, what was known, and go to a place that was yet to be revealed. There were no visible guarantees. There was no map. There were no detailed explanations. Still he was. And Genesis 15:6 reveals something profound. Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. It wasn't the absence of fear that defined Abraham. It was the choice to trust, even without understanding. And maybe what's taking away your peace today is exactly that, the attempt to understand everything before trusting. The mind begins to create scenarios, predict problems, anticipate pains that haven't even happened yet. And the more you try to solve everything yourself, the heavier it gets, more tiring, more restless. But there is a point where peace begins to enter. And that point is when you let go of the controller. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." This is not just advice. It is a key, because human understanding is limited, flawed, unstable. Today you think you know, tomorrow everything changes. But when the mind rests in God, something different happens. It doesn't mean that problems go away, but it does mean that they lose the power to dominate what's inside of you. The person who truly trusts does not live in constant despair. She may face difficult days, but there is a firm foundation within her, a silent certainty that there is a direction being driven, even when it is not visible. And this certainty calms down. This certainty sustains. This certainty protects the mind from chaos. And perhaps you are now realizing that the peace you seek so much is not in having all the answers, but to trust in the one who already knows them all. There is a rest that only appears when you stop fighting alone, when you understand that you don't have to carry everything. If this message from God is speaking to you in a special way, maybe it's because today was the day you heard it. Don't ignore this touch on your heart. If something inside you has moved, write here in the comments, Amen. Sometimes a simple word can mark the beginning of something much bigger within you, and after understanding that trusting God calms the mind, an even deeper level of that peace emerges. A place where it is not words that dominate, but silence, because there is something that few realize. God does not always speak in the midst of the noise. In fact, He often expects the silence that almost no one is willing to live. The world teaches that you must always be busy, always thinking, always solving something. The mind never stops. Even when the body rests, thoughts keep running, jumping from one problem to another, creating a constant noise inside. And in this excess of internal noise, God's voice is being muffled, not because He stopped speaking, but because we can no longer hear. Elijah went through something like this. He was tired, emotionally drained, waiting for God to manifest Himself in a grandiose, visible, impactful way. And then came strong signals, a powerful wind, an earthquake, fire. But the Bible makes it clear in 1 Kings 19:12, the Lord was not in the wind, not even in the earthquake, nor in the fire. And after all this, something almost imperceptible came, a soft whisper, and that's where God was. This reveals something profound. The peace you seek is not in excess, it is in the essential. It's not in the noise, it's in the silence. Because inner silence is not empty, it is presence. Is the place where the mind stops struggling, where thoughts slow down, where the soul begins to breathe for real. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Quieting down is not just being silent on the outside, it is silence from within. It is to interrupt, even if only for a few moments, this constant need to understand everything, to solve everything, to control everything. And in that space, something starts to happen. Anxiety loses strength, fear decreases, and clarity begins to emerge naturally. Maybe what is missing is no more answers, but less noise, less distraction, less hurry, because God does not compete with noise. It reveals itself in the place where few have the courage to stay, silence. And when you start experiencing this, you realize that you don't need big signals all the time. A whisper is enough. When the heart is sensitive to hear, if this word is awakening in you, this deep desire to truly hear God, write here in the comments, "Speak, Lord, your servant hears." Write as a sincere prayer. And if it makes sense to you, leave your like in this video. This helps this message to reach other people who are also in need of learning to listen to God's voice. in the midst of silence. And in this silence where the voice of God begins to be perceived, something even deeper needs to happen, because it is not enough just to listen. It is necessary to allow what has been heard to transform the way you think. Because the truth is that many continue to be restless not for lack of prayer, but for an excess of misaligned thoughts. The human mind is like a field that is never empty. If it is not filled with the truth, it will automatically be dominated by lies, thoughts of fear, doubt, inability, ideas that seem real but that do not come from God. And the problem is that when these thoughts repeat themselves, they begin to create a false sense of truth. And then one starts to live based on that, without realizing that one is imprisoned within one's own mind. That is why Paul was so direct in Romans 12:2 when he said, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." He didn't talk about changing circumstances first. He talked about changing his mind, because that's where it all begins. An unrenewed mind interprets everything in a distorted way. Small problems become big threats. Simple situations generate anxiety, and little by little, peace is being suffocated. But when the mind begins to be renewed by the truth of God, something changes completely. What used to generate fear is starting to lose strength. What caused confusion is beginning to become clear, and this doesn't happen all at once. It's a process, a constant adjustment, where you begin to replace old thoughts with eternal truths. Jesus did this all the time. When he was confronted, when he was tested, when someone brought confusion, he answered with the truth, not with opinion, not with emotion, but with that which is firm, unchangeable. And in John 8:32 it is written, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." It's not just knowing about listening. It is to know, to internalize, to live, to let this truth occupy the space where doubt once existed. Perhaps today there are thoughts within you that seem impossible to overcome. Ideas that always come back, memories that weigh you down, insecurities that don't go away. But what few realize is that these thoughts only remain because they have not yet been confronted by the certain truth. And when you start doing that, even if little by little, the mind starts to find a new place of rest. Not because everything has changed on the outside, but because something has finally begun to line up inside. And maybe, simply put, you can start now with a small decision that carries more power than it seems. If this truth is touching you in any way, write here in the comments a short sentence but full of faith. God renews my mind. Sometimes declaring this is not just writing, it is taking the first step to live. And when the mind begins to be renewed by truth, it begins to see the storms in a completely different way. Because the problem was never the existence of storms, but the way you position yourself within them. There are times when everything seems to get out of control, situations that arrive without warning, news that shakes, changes that no one expected. And it is exactly in these moments that true peace is revealed. The disciples lived this intensely. They were inside a boat with Jesus, and suddenly a violent storm began to form. The wind was blowing strongly, the waves were invading the boat, and fear took hold of everyone. But there was a detail that changes everything in this story. While everything was in chaos, Jesus was asleep. This seems strange at first glance. How can one rest in the middle of a storm? How is it possible to be calm when everything around you threatens to collapse? And that's exactly where the secret that few understand. Jesus' peace didn't depend on the environment, it depended on the authority he carried within himself. When the disciples woke him up in despair, he simply got up and, as it is written in Mark 4:39, said to the sea, "Calm down, be still." And at that very moment, everything calmed down. The wind ceased. The sea quieted down. And what was once despair turned into silence. But there's something even deeper here. Before calming the storm outside, Jesus was already at peace inside. He was not affected by the external chaos, because there was an internal stability that could not be shaken. And perhaps what is missing is not the absence of problems, but the presence of that authority within you. Because Isaiah 43:2 says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." It doesn't say you won't pass. It says you won't be alone. The mind at peace is not the one that never faces difficulties, but the one that does not get lost in them. It is the one that, even feeling the contrary wind, maintains a silent certainty that there is something greater sustaining everything. And this completely changes the way of living, because when that peace starts to grow inside you, the storms may even keep coming, but they no longer have the same power as before. They no longer dominate your thoughts. They no longer control their emotions. They no longer define their decisions. And little by little, you begin to realize that the real miracle is not just the sea calming down. It is your mind remaining steady while it is still agitated. If you are here so far, it is because there is something being aligned within you. Perhaps in a silent way, but really. And it doesn't end there. In the end, we will have a special moment of prayer, a moment of deep connection, where everything you are listening to can become something alive within you. So stay until the end, because that may be exactly the moment that will mark a new beginning in your life. And it is precisely in the midst of these storms that many people, without realizing it, begin to tighten their grip even more, as if holding on to everything tighter would bring some security. But the effect is the opposite. The more you try to control every detail, the heavier everything gets. The mind tires, the body feels, and the heart begins to carry a weight it was never meant to bear. There is a very fine line between responsibility and overload. And when that line is crossed, peace begins to fade, because trying to control everything is, deep down, taking a place that is not yours. It is wanting to predict what has not yet happened, to solve what has not yet arrived, to carry what should not even be in your hands. And it is at this point that Jesus' words become even more profound, almost like a personal, direct, intimate invitation. In Matthew 11:28, he says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It is not an invitation to perfect people, nor to those who already have everything sorted out. It is a call for those who are tired of trying, of thinking too much, of holding everything on my own. This rest that he offers is not just physical. It's not simply stopping for a few hours. It is a rest that reaches the mind, that relieves the heart, that takes away that invisible weight that many carry every day. But there is a silent condition in this invitation. It is necessary to deliver. And delivering often seems difficult, because the feeling is of loss of control. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. It is to leave a limited control, to trust in perfect care. 1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." All, not a part, not only what is easy, everything. Maybe there are things today that you're still trying to solve on your own, thoughts that you revisit all the time, situations that you try to organize in your mind, but that keep bringing you restlessness. And the more you insist on it, the more distant peace seems to get. But when you start, even if little by little, to let go, something changes, not necessarily around, but within you. The mind begins to slow down, the heart begins to become lighter, and a different feeling arises, as if you are finally no longer carrying everything alone. Surrender is not giving up. It is trusting. It is recognizing that there is someone greater taking care of every detail, even when you can't see it. And this awareness changes everything. Perhaps now is the time to do something simple but deeply spiritual. If this touched you in any way, write in the comments, "Lord, I receive your teachings." He writes as a gesture of surrender. And if you can, leave your like, because this message can reach other people who also need to learn how to really rest. And when you begin to surrender control and experience this rest, something very important needs to happen for this peace to remain, to protect what is happening inside your mind, because there is a reality that is not always perceived. Not every thought that arises in you should be accepted as truth. Often, the mind receives ideas of fear, internal accusations, negative memories, thoughts of failure, and all of this comes so automatically that it seems natural. But it is not. There is a silent battle going on, an invisible conflict where peace can be built or destroyed. And it all starts with what you decide to keep inside your mind. The Bible clearly reveals this at 2 Corinthians 10:5. We take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. This means that not every thought deserves space. Not everything you feel should be fed. There is a spiritual responsibility to filter, observe, and even reject that which does not come from God. Because when a wrong thought comes in and remains, it starts to grow. It repeats itself, gains strength, influences emotions, and when you realize it, it's already affecting decisions. And that's how peace is stolen, not all at once, but little by little, from the inside out. But when you develop spiritual discernment, something changes completely. You begin to notice what previously went unnoticed. He begins to identify patterns, recognize voices, distinguish what edifies and what destroys. And this brings protection. Philippians 4:8 provides very practical guidance. Whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, think about these things. This is not just a pretty suggestion, it's a powerful direction. Because what occupies your mind defines the state of your soul. Perhaps today there are thoughts that are stealing your peace without you realizing it. Ideas that repeat themselves, worries that don't stop, feelings that seem to grow on their own. But from the moment you start filtering that with awareness, in the light of God's truth, the mind starts to strengthen. And it's not about never having negative thoughts. It's about not allowing them to take root. It's about taking an active stance, protecting your mind as something precious, because it really is. And as you realize this, perhaps you will begin to understand that peace is not just about feeling something good. It is also knowing what to reject, know what not to allow to stay. If this message is already speaking to you in some way, it may not be a coincidence. It could be God showing you something that needed to be adjusted within you. And if you felt that, enjoy this moment. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. Because when you do that, that message reaches other people who also need to learn to protect their own mind and find that peace that comes from God. And as you begin to protect your mind, filtering thoughts and rejecting that which is not of God, an even deeper realization arises. The peace you seek so much is not something that is found outside in ideal circumstances or perfect moments, but something that is born of a presence. It's not an idea, it's not a concept, it's someone. Moses understood this in a way that few did. At a decisive moment, when there was a promise before him, a way forward, and a destination prepared, he made a statement that reveals the true secret of peace. He basically said that he wouldn't take a single step if God's presence wasn't with him. And in Exodus 33:14, God answers, "My presence will go with you and I will give you rest." Notice this. Rest did not come from conquest, it did not come from the promised land, it did not come from the absence of challenges. Rest came from presence. This completely changes the way we see life, because many people believe that they will find peace when they solve everything, when they organize everything, when they achieve something. But the truth is, even when they get there, the mind remains restless if God's presence is not there. The mind at peace is the one that learns to abide. Not only seeking God in times of need, but living connected, conscious, sensitive to His presence on a daily basis, in the simple details, in the pauses, in the decisions, in the thoughts. Because when that connection becomes constant, something starts to flow naturally. Psalm 16:11 declares, "In your presence there is a fullness of joy." It's not a partial joy, it's not something momentary, it is plenitude. And this plenitude generates stability, generates security, generates a peace that does not depend on what is happening outside. Perhaps you have already sought this peace in many places, in answers, in people, in quick solutions, but still felt that something was missing, and perhaps what was missing was no more effort. It was presence, because it is in the presence of God that the mind finds the place where it can finally rest without having to flee from reality. And when you start living like this, you realize that you are no longer alone at any time. There is constant companionship, continuous care, a silent direction that guides every step. And that changes everything. And maybe now, as you listen to this, someone will come to your mind. Someone who also needs this peace, this presence, this encounter with God. Don't ignore it. It can be more than a thought. If this name came to your heart right here in the comments, let's together form a chain of faith, presenting these people before God. Because when we unite in prayer, something powerful begins to happen, even if we can't see it yet. And when that presence begins to become real within you, an even deeper transformation arises, because it is not possible to sustain a mind at peace carrying a confused identity. Many concerns that seem to come from outside are actually born from within, of silent doubts about who you are, about your worth, about your place. And while this identity is not established, any situation can shake it. The way you see yourself defines the way you react. If deep down there is insecurity, fear of not being enough, constant need for approval, then the mind never rests completely. There will always be something trying to prove value. There will always be an inner pressure, even when no one is demanding anything. But Jesus never lived like this. He faced rejection, criticism, opposition, extreme moments of pain, and yet he remained steadfast. And what sustained this stability was not the absence of problems, but clarity of identity. Before he even began his public journey, a voice from heaven declared at Matthew 3:17, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." This is profound, because this affirmation came before any miracle, before any human recognition, before any visible achievement. Jesus' identity was not based on what he did, but in who he was before God. And that's exactly what changes everything. When identity is rooted in God, the mind stops oscillating according to circumstances. The approval of others no longer defines your value. Situations no longer have the power to destabilize you completely. There is a base, a silent certainty that sustains everything. Romans 8:16 says, "The Spirit Himself bears witness to our spirit that we are children of God." This is not just information, it is a revelation that needs to be lived. Because when you really understand that, something aligns within you. Insecurity begins to lose strength. The comparison no longer makes sense. The need to prove something to the world diminishes. And then the mind begins to rest in a different place, no longer in that which changes, but in that which is eternal, no longer in people's opinion, but in God's truth. And this internal stability creates a peace that does not depend on anything external to be maintained. Perhaps today there is a voice within you that still questions, that still brings doubts, that still tries to weaken your identity. But there is a greater truth that needs to occupy this space. And when that happens, everything starts to take hold. Nothing happens by chance. If you've made it this far, there's a purpose to it. And what is yet to come can touch even deeper areas of your life. Stay until the end, because this journey is not over yet. And it may be exactly here that something definitive begins to settle within you. And even when the identity begins to take hold, there is still a deeper layer that needs to be touched, because often the mind remains restless, not for lack of faith, but because of old wounds that were never really treated. There are invisible marks, experiences that were kept, words that hurt, situations that left silent scars. And the most delicate thing is that these pains do not disappear over time. They only hide, but continue to influence thoughts, emotions, and reactions. How many times was the restlessness you feel today not born in the present, but in something that was unresolved back then? A disappointment, a loss, an injustice, a rejection. And without even realizing it, it starts to shape the way you see everything. The mind tries to protect itself, creates barriers, distrusts, anticipates, and peace is becoming more and more distant. But this is where something powerful reveals itself. Because God does not only deal with what is visible, He reaches for what is hidden. He enters exactly the places where no one else can reach. Psalm 147:3 states, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." This means that there is no pain forgotten by God. There is no wound ignored by Him. Joseph's story shows this in a profound way. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, wronged, forgotten, all of which could generate bitterness, revolt, and permanent pain. Humanly speaking, he had every reason to live stuck in the past. But something different happened inside him. When he finally had the opportunity to confront those who had hurt him, his response revealed a completely healed mind. At Genesis 50:20, he states, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." This is not denial of pain. It is the transformation of pain. It is looking back without carrying the weight, without reliving the wound, without allowing it to continue defining the present. And that only happens when God enters these deep areas of the soul. When you allow Him to touch that which you have avoided for so long, because often the tendency is to hide, ignore, move on as if nothing had happened. But true healing begins when there is courage to open one's heart before God. And when that process begins, something changes in the way you think. The pain loses strength. Memories stop hurting. The past no longer controls the present. And the mind begins finally to find rest, because there is no complete peace as long as there are open wounds. But when God heals, He doesn't just remove the pain, He transforms history. And what was once a cause of suffering becomes a silent testimony of restoration. And when these wounds begin to heal, something very common can still arise: confusion. Because even with the heart being restored, the mind often finds itself at crossroads, not knowing which path to take, which decision to make, or even which direction is the right one. And this uncertainty, silently, also steals peace. There are times in life when everything seems undefined. You think, you analyze, you try to predict, but no answer seems clear enough. And the more you try to solve it with your own logic alone, the more confusing everything gets. The mind begins to spin in circles, creating possibilities, scenarios, doubts, and peace begins to recede. But there is something that needs to be understood in depth. The mind at peace is not the one that has all the answers, but the one that knows who to trust when it has none. Because God never left His children without direction, even when the path seemed impossible to understand. Joshua lived exactly that. He was given a huge mission to replace Moses and lead an entire people in the face of gigantic challenges. Humanly speaking, there was every reason for fear, insecurity, and confusion, but God didn't give him a detailed map of everything that was going to happen. God gave something greater, direction and presence. In Joshua 1:9 it is written, "Was it not I who commanded you? Be strong and brave. Do not be terrified or discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Notice, Safety was not in knowing everything, but in knowing who was driving, and that completely changes the way the mind reacts. Because when you understand that God sees the end from the beginning, you no longer have to live overwhelmed by anxiety about having all the answers now. There is a rest in knowing that every step can be guided, even if the full path is not yet visible. Psalm 32:8 reinforces this clearly. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. This means that driving is not something far away. It is available. But often, it only becomes clear when the mind slows down, when the heart quiets down, when there is a willingness to listen. And little by little, you begin to realize that the confusion doesn't go away because you've found all the solutions. It disappears because you have found direction, and direction brings peace. Even if the path still has challenges, there is a clarity that underpins every decision. Maybe today you are exactly in that place, trying to understand the next step, looking for answers, dealing with internal doubts. But this word did not come to you by chance. If something inside you has been touched, write in the comments, I trust in God. Let this be your statement, even if in silence, as a step of faith in the midst of uncertainty. And even when there is direction, there is a silent enemy that tries to steal this clarity almost without being noticed. Anxiety. It doesn't arrive making noise. It settles in little by little, occupying the mind with thoughts about what hasn't even happened yet. It is as if the mind was pulled into an uncertain future, creating scenarios, anticipating problems, trying to solve what does not yet exist. And the more this happens, the more distant peace seems to become. Anxiety has a dangerous characteristic. It gives the feeling of control, but in fact it only increases the restlessness. You think you're preparing, that you're anticipating it, but deep down, you're just wearing yourself out. The mind does not rest, the heart accelerates, and a constant pressure begins to take over. This is exactly what Jesus confronted directly. In Matthew 6:34, he declared, Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring your own cares. That's not just pretty advice. It is a profound spiritual principle. Because anxiety always tries to take you away from the only place where peace can exist, the present. And to make this even clearer, there is a simple but extremely revealing scene. Martha and Mary were faced with the same situation, in the presence of the same Jesus, in the same environment, but their experience was completely different. Martha was restless, busy, overwhelmed with many things at once. Maria, on the other hand, made a different choice. She stopped, sat down, and decided to be present. In Luke 10:41-42, Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are worried about many things, yet only one is necessary. This phrase carries a powerful key. Many things may seem important, urgent, necessary, but only one sustains true peace, and maybe what's happening to you today is just that. Many worries at the same time, many thoughts vying for space, many situations asking for attention. And in the midst of it all, the mind gets lost, gets tired, moving away from what really matters. But the path to liberation begins with a simple yet profound choice: to return to the now, back to presence. Understand that not everything needs to be solved today, that not everything is under your control, and that there is care happening even when you can't see it. Anxiety loses strength when you stop feeding it. When you decide not to follow every thought, not to get into every worry, not to get carried away by every scenario created in the mind, and little by little, peace begins to return. Not because everything has changed, but because you have changed the way you position yourself. If you are here now, it is no accident. There is something being dealt with within you, something being adjusted in a quiet but real way, and there is still more to be revealed. Don't leave now, because what comes next can open your eyes even more and touch areas that you didn't even imagine needed this transformation. And when anxiety starts to lose strength, a new foundation needs to be built within you, because it's not enough to just silence thoughts. It is necessary to strengthen that which sustains your mind in the face of the impossible. And this foundation has a name: faith. Not a fragile faith, which depends on what is happening around us, but a firm faith, which remains even when everything seems otherwise. Because the truth is that there will always be times when logic will not help, when circumstances will not cooperate, when the answers will not appear in the time you would like. And it is exactly in these moments that faith ceases to be theory, and it becomes sustenance. Daniel lived this in an extreme way. He was thrown into a den full of lions, a scenario where there was no human possibility of survival. There was no way out, there was no strategy, there was no visible solution. It was the kind of situation that would naturally generate absolute despair. But something inside him was not shaken. Daniel 6:23 reveals, "No wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God." Notice this. Before any external deliverance, there was already an internal stability. Daniel's confidence did not start in the grave. It was already built much earlier, and that's exactly what defines an unshakable faith. It is not something that arises only when everything is difficult, but something that has been developed, strengthened, nurtured over time. It is a conviction that does not depend on what the eyes see, but on what the heart has decided to believe. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of what we hope for, and the evidence of the things we do not see." This means that true faith does not need immediate confirmation. It does not require visible guarantees. It remains firm even when there are no apparent signs. And maybe today you are facing something that seems impossible, a situation that makes no sense, a problem that seems bigger than you, a scenario that has no way out. And the natural tendency of the mind is to be shaken, to question, to doubt. But when faith begins to grow, something changes. The situation may even remain the same for a while, but the way you position yourself within it is completely different. There is a silent strength, a trust that cannot be explained, a peace that does not depend on logic, and little by little you begin to realize that the impossible does not have the final word, that there is something greater sustaining everything, even when it is not visible. And this certainty creates such a firm foundation that the mind ceases to waver. You may not have all the answers right now, but faith allows you to stand firm anyway, and that already changes everything inside. If you feel that God has been good, even in the midst of hardship, perhaps it is time to recognize this in a simple but powerful way. Right here in the comments, Amen. Sometimes a word of faith can strengthen not only you, but also someone who needs to remember that God is still in control. And when that faith begins to take hold, it needs something to sustain it over time, because even faith can be tested when responses are delayed, when the days go by and nothing seems to change. It is at this point that many begin to waver, not because they stopped believing, but because they forgot where they should be leaning. And this is where one of the most powerful secrets to a peaceful mind comes in: God's promises. Because a mind without a basis begins to be easily carried away by everything that happens around it. One day she is fine, the next she is already shaken. One piece of news changes everything. An unexpected situation generates fear. But when the mind is fixed on promises, it finds a point of stability that does not depend on circumstances. Abraham lived this intensely. He received a promise that to human eyes seemed impossible. Time passed, the signs did not appear, and everything around seemed to contradict what God had said. But even so, he remained steadfast. Romans 4:20-21 states, "He did not waver in unbelief about the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith. This shows that his strength was not in what he saw, but in what he decided to keep inside. God's promises act as anchors, and an anchor doesn't stop the storm from happening, but it prevents the boat from being taken by her. This is exactly what happens to the mind when it is grounded in what God has already declared. The winds may come, doubts may try to come in, but there is something holding everything in place. Hebrews 10:23 reinforces, "Let us hold fast to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." It's not just about believing the promise, it's about holding on to her. It's about bringing to memory, repeating, internalizing, until it becomes stronger than any contrary thought. Perhaps today you are at a time when circumstances are speaking louder than faith. Situations that seem to belie what you expected, that make you question, that try to weaken your confidence. But the truth is that the promise does not lose its validity just because time has passed. And when you start to position yourself like that, something changes inside you. The mind stops reacting to everything that happens and begins to stand firm on what God has already said. And this firmness generates a peace that does not easily waver. Because in the end, it's not about what's happening now. It's about who made the promise. And he continues to be faithful. That word didn't come to you by chance. There is something being strengthened within you, something that you may not even realize you needed. And what is yet to come can further deepen this transformation. Stay until the end, because what God is building inside you now can mark a new time in your life. And even when the mind clings to the promises, there are times when darkness seems to try to cover everything, as if hope is slowly fading away. These are phases in which the answers do not arrive, in which the silence seems longer, in which the heart feels the weight of the difficult days. And it is exactly in these moments that many believe that peace has disappeared. But in fact, it just needs to be sustained by something even deeper: hope. But not just any hope, not a fragile expectation based on what may or may not happen. It is a hope that is born of God's faithfulness, a silent certainty that even when all seems lost, he continues to be present, he continues to act, he continues to sustain. Jeremiah lived through one of the most devastating scenarios in history. Jerusalem was destroyed, the people were suffering, everything around pointed to chaos and pain. Humanly speaking, there was no reason for hope, and yet, in the midst of this scenario, he declared something that crosses generations. In Lamentations 3:22-23 it is written, "The mercies of the Lord are the cause of our not being consumed. They are renewed every morning." Notice the depth of this. His hope was not in the situation, it was in God. He did not deny the pain. He did not ignore the suffering, but he chose to look at something that was above all that. And that completely changes the way the mind reacts. Because when hope is renewed, even if circumstances don't change immediately, something inside you begins to rise again. The mind stops sinking into negative thoughts and begins to find a new perspective, not based on what you see, but in what you know about who God is. Psalm 42:11 brings a powerful inner dialogue. "Why are you cast down, O my soul? Put your hope in God." This shows that the soul will not always be firm, feelings will not always help, but there is a choice that can be made, directing hope. And maybe today you are facing one of those moments. Heavier days, more difficult thoughts, a feeling that something is out of place. But hope does not need to wait for everything to improve to exist. It can be renewed now, even in the midst of darkness. And when that happens, the mind starts finding balance again. Not because everything has been resolved, but because there is a light that does not go out, even on the most difficult days. That light is God's faithfulness, constant, present, renewed every morning. And when hope begins to be renewed, there is an even more powerful force that sustains that peace over time: remembering. Because one of the greatest traps of the mind is to forget what God has already done. In difficult moments, the tendency is to focus only on the current problem, as if it were bigger than anything that has ever been experienced. And it is exactly at this point that fear begins to grow. But there is a spiritual resource that completely changes this scenario: the testimony. Not only what you hear from others, but especially what you yourself have experienced with God. Every deliverance, every answer, every moment when it seemed impossible, and yet something happened. This is no coincidence. It is faith-building. David understood this deeply. When he stood before Goliath, it wasn't just courage that sustained him. It was memory. As everyone saw an impossible giant to beat, David looked back and remembered what God had already done in his life. In 1 Samuel 17:37, he declares, "The Lord has delivered me out of the clutches of the lion and the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." Notice this. His confidence in the present was directly linked to what he experienced in the past. He didn't ignore the size of the challenge, but he also didn't forget the size of the God who had taken care of him before. And this completely changed his posture. The mind at peace learns to do this. She does not allow herself to be dominated only by what is happening now, but seeks, within her own history, evidence that God continues to be faithful. Because each experience lived with God becomes a solid basis for facing new challenges. Revelation 12:11 says, "They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony." This reveals that testimony is not just remembrance, it is a spiritual weapon. It is that which strengthens, which lifts, which brings back confidence when everything seems to want to weaken. Maybe today you are facing something that seems too big, a situation that tries to steal your peace, that tries to make you forget everything that has happened before. But if you stop for a moment and look back, you'll realize that you didn't get here alone. And when that awareness comes back, something aligns again within you. Fear loses ground, confidence grows, and the mind finds a new point of balance. And maybe this message didn't just reach you. There are people who also need to be remembered, who also need to rediscover that hope that is born by remembering what God has already done. If you feel it, participate in it simply. By liking this video, subscribing to the channel and activating the bell, you help this message to reach other hearts that also need this strength. Small attitudes can become great instruments in God's hands. And when you start remembering what God has already done, something inside you gets stronger. But there is a dimension that is often ignored and that has a profound impact on the mind: the need to walk together with other people. Because no matter how strong one is, the spiritual walk was never designed to be solitary. Isolation may seem comfortable at times, but over time it weakens. The mind begins to become more vulnerable, thoughts gain more space, doubts intensify, and what could be solved with a word of support becomes a silent burden. And without realizing it, the person closes himself off, moves away, trying to carry everything alone. But from the beginning, God showed that it was not good for man to be alone. And this isn't just about company, it's about spiritual strengthening. The early church understood this in a practical way. In Acts 2:46-47 it is written, "They kept meeting together every day, praising God." There was constancy, there was connection, there was unity. They shared not only good moments but also challenges, prayers, burdens. And that creates something powerful. Because when you are surrounded by people who also seek God, your mind finds support. When you weaken, someone lifts you up. When you feel lost, someone reminds you of the way. When faith seems small, the faith of the other strengthens you. Ecclesiastes 4:9-10 expresses this clearly. "It is better to have company than to be alone. If one falls, the other helps to get up." This is a simple but often overlooked truth, because the human tendency is to try to solve everything alone, as if asking for help is a sign of weakness. But in fact, recognizing the need of the other is a sign of wisdom. A mind at peace is not one that never faces difficulties. She is the one who does not face everything alone. It is the one that understands the value of being connected, of sharing, of walking together. Because there are battles that become lighter when they are divided. Maybe today you are trying to carry things alone, holding on to feelings, facing challenges in silence. But there is strength in communion. There is healing in connection. There is peace in knowing that you don't have to walk alone. And when you allow yourself to live that, something changes inside you. The mind is strengthened, the heart is relieved, and the walk becomes lighter. Because God often uses people to support what you couldn't support on your own. And when this connection with other people begins to strengthen your journey, something even deeper needs to become clear within you. Because there is a silent root that can generate constant restlessness, the lack of purpose. A mind without a defined direction easily gets lost in scattered thoughts, in unnecessary worries, in paths that lead nowhere. And the more a person lives without understanding the reason for their own journey, the more vulnerable they become to emptiness and confusion. But when the purpose begins to be revealed, everything changes. The mind finds focus, the heart finds meaning, and even challenges take on a different meaning. Because it's no longer just about what's going on, it's about where all of this is taking you. Esther's story shows this in a powerful way. She didn't start out understanding the purpose of her position. She was just a young woman who became queen, but without fully understanding why. Until, at a critical moment, everything was revealed. In Esther 4:14 it is written, "Who knows whether it was not for such a time as this that you came to the position of queen?" That phrase changes everything, because it shows that what seemed ordinary was actually part of something much bigger. And when Esther understood this, insecurity gave way to courage. Fear was replaced by positioning, and her mind found stability, even in the face of enormous risk. Purpose has that power. It aligns the mind. It eliminates distractions. It takes the focus away from what doesn't matter and directs it to what really makes sense. Because when you know why you're walking, you don't easily get lost along the way. Jeremiah 29:11 clearly reinforces this truth. "For it is I who know the plans I have for you." This means that nothing is loose, nothing is by chance. Even what you don't yet understand is part of a larger plan that has already been designed by God. Maybe today you still don't have total clarity about your purpose. Perhaps there are doubts, questions, a feeling of just moving forward with no defined direction. But the fact that you're here already shows that something is being aligned, because God doesn't reveal everything at once. It shows little by little, as the heart is ready. And when that clarity begins to emerge, even in small parts, the mind finds rest, because it stops wandering meaninglessly and starts walking with direction. And this brings a peace that does not depend on circumstances, but on the understanding that there is a purpose being fulfilled. And if this message is bringing some confirmation within you, maybe it's time to declare it simply, but with faith. Write in the comments, "God takes care of me," because when you state that, you're not just writing. It is aligning your mind with a truth that underpins everything. And when purpose starts to bring direction, the last big battle that needs to be won happens in a place that no one sees, inside the mind. Because it's no use knowing where to go if thoughts keep trying to paralyze you on the way. The truth is that many defeats in life do not begin in circumstances. They begin within the mind, in repetitive, negative, destructive thoughts. These are ideas that arise in a subtle way. Doubts about yourself, fears that seem real, memories that come back strongly, thoughts that say that it won't work, that there is no way out, that nothing will change. And if these thoughts are not confronted, they begin to take root. And when they take root, they start to influence everything. But there is one truth that needs to be clearly understood. You don't have to accept everything you think. Not every thought comes from God, and not every thought deserves to remain. There is a battle going on, and victory begins when you decide not to surrender to everything that crosses your mind. Jesus showed this clearly when he was tempted in the wilderness. He was confronted directly, not only with external situations, but with suggestions, ideas, temptations that tried to distort the truth. And how did he respond? With the word. In Matthew 4:4 it is written, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." This reveals something powerful. The mind is strengthened when it is fed with the right truth. When you begin to replace negative thoughts with God's word, something changes. Doubt loses strength. Fear begins to recede. The confusion dissolves. And little by little, the mind aligns with what is true. Romans 8:37 states, "In all these things, we are more than conquerors." It's not a distant promise. It is an available spiritual reality. But this victory does not start from the outside. It starts inside the mind, the moment you decide who to believe. Maybe today there is a struggle going on inside, thoughts that try to weaken you, that try to discourage you, that try to steal your peace. But there is an authority you can assume, not in his own strength, but in what God has already declared. And when you start living like this, the mind stops being an uncontrolled battlefield and becomes a protected place. A place where truth rules, where peace remains, where thoughts no longer have freedom to dominate. And this doesn't happen all at once. It's a process, a daily choice. But each time you choose the truth, you strengthen that victory within you. What you're getting here isn't just information, it is transformation. And what comes next can further deepen this change that has already begun within you. Stay until the end, because there is something that can definitely mark the way you think, feel, and live from now on. And after learning to overcome thoughts, an even deeper level of this journey emerges. Because it is not enough just to reject what is negative, it is necessary to learn to recognize what is true. And it is here that many get lost, not for lack of faith, but for an excess of voices. The world talks all the time, opinions, pressures, fears, confusing advice. All this creates a constant noise that tries to occupy the space where God's voice should be heard. And when the mind is full of this noise, it loses sensitivity. He begins to confuse direction with impulse, emotion with truth, haste with purpose. And this generates a silent restlessness because deep down, there is the feeling that something is not clear, that there is a lack of safe direction. But the mind at peace learns something essential, to recognize God's voice in the midst of it all. Not because the noise disappears, but because spiritual sensitivity increases. And this sensitivity is not born ready, it is developed. Samuel lived exactly this process. As a young man, he heard a voice calling, but he could not identify where it came from. He had to learn, he had to be guided, to stop, to pay attention, to position himself. And when he finally understood, his answer was simple, but powerful. In 1 Samuel 3:10, he said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." This sentence reveals the secret. It's not just about God talking. It's about being willing to listen. It's about creating inner space, silencing other voices, adjusting the heart to recognize what comes from above. Jesus confirmed this directly in John 10:27. "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." This shows that there is a real, accessible connection. God keeps speaking. The question is the mind prepared to discern? Because when you learn to recognize that voice, something changes completely. The confusion begins to disappear. Decisions are no longer a constant burden. There is a direction that brings safety, even when the path is not yet fully visible. And this voice does not generate despair, does not generate pressure, does not bring fear. It brings peace, even when it corrects. It brings clarity, even when challenging. She leads firmly, but also carefully. Maybe today what is missing is not more information, but more sensitivity, less external noise and more internal attention. Because the voice of God does not compete with noise. It reveals itself in the heart that learns to listen. And when that starts happening, the mind finds a new level of stability, not based on what others say, nor on what circumstances show, but on what God is saying. And this voice, when it is recognized, becomes direction, becomes security, and above all, it becomes peace. And when the mind begins to recognize God's voice, something inevitable comes to the fore. The perception that at some point there may have been a distancing, not necessarily something abrupt, but a silent, almost imperceptible withdrawal which happens gradually. The routine takes place, worries increase, other voices begin to occupy the heart, and when you realize it, that connection that was once alive no longer has the same intensity, and it is exactly from this distancing that much of the restlessness is born. Because the mind may even try to rely on other things, but deep down it was created to be connected with God. When that connection weakens, something inside you starts to miss it, even if you can't explain exactly what. The parable of the prodigal son reveals this in a profound way. He decided to move away, to follow his own path, to live in his own way. At first, it seemed like freedom, but over time, it turned into emptiness. And it was at this point that something changed inside him. In Luke 15:17, it is written, "He came to his senses and said, 'How many of my father's laborers have food to spare, and I am here starving?'" This coming to its senses is one of the most important moments of the spiritual life. It is when the person realizes that he has moved away from the essence, who tried to fill the void with other things, but nothing brought real peace. And this recognition is not the end. It's the beginning, because from there comes the decision to return. And it is here that many still hesitate, thinking that they have moved too far, that there is no longer any way. But James 4:8 brings a simple and powerful truth. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. There is no barrier, there is no distance that God is not willing to cross when someone decides to return. The mind at peace is born from this closeness. It's not about perfection, it's about relationship. It's about talking to God again, listening again, feeling that connection that brings security again. And when that happens, something starts to reorganize itself inside. The restlessness loses strength, the emptiness begins to be filled, and the soul finds its place again. Perhaps you are noticing now that something has drifted away, that the connection is no longer the same as before. But that's not a reason to blame. It's an invitation, a silent call to return to the essence, to start over, to reconnect. And this return can start in a simple way, even now. If this touched you, write your prayer request in the comments. He puts there what is in his heart, what needs care, response, intervention. Because when you open up, something starts moving. And this reconnection is no longer just a wish and begins to become a reality. And when that return starts to happen, when the connection with God is restored, something inside of you starts to awaken, as if a light were turned on in a place that was previously asleep. Because there is a reality that many ignore. The mind may even be working, but spiritually it may be asleep. And this sleep is not immediately noticed. It comes through distraction, purposeless routine, lack of sensitivity. Gradually, what is spiritual is being set aside, and what is urgent in the natural world begins to dominate everything. And without realizing it, the person begins to live on automatic, without surveillance, without attention, without awareness of what really matters. But there is a call echoing all the time, an invitation to wake up before it's too late. Jesus made this clear in the parable of the 10 virgins. They were all waiting, they all looked similar, but there was one essential difference. Some were prepared, some were not. And when the moment came, this difference was evident. Matthew 25:13 states, "Watch, for you do not know the day or the hour." To watch is not to live in fear. It is living with awareness. It is not getting carried away by constant distraction. It is keeping the mind attentive, the heart sensitive, the life aligned with that which really has eternal value. The mind at peace is not only tranquil, it is awake. He perceives what is happening around him, but he also discerns what is happening in the spiritual world. It does not get lost in illusions. It does not get attached to passing things. It does not live only reacting to what appears. There is an active consciousness, an attention that protects. Romans 13:11 reinforces this call in a straightforward way. It is high time for you to awake from sleep. This is not just a sentence, it's a warning, because the more the mind is distracted, the further it moves away from true peace. And the more awakened it becomes, the more aligned it is with God's will. Perhaps you are now realizing that at times you have lived on automatic, without this awareness, without this vigilance. But this awakening does not come to generate guilt, comes to generate positioning. It is an invitation to open our eyes, adjust the route, return to living with intention. And when that happens, something changes profoundly. The mind ceases to be passive and becomes active. He begins to discern, to choose, to position himself clearly. And this posture brings a different peace, a peace that is not distracted but conscious, firm, prepared. Because when you wake up, you don't just live, you understand. And when you do, you don't get lost easily. And it is in this place that peace begins to become constant, even in a world full of distractions. And when this awakening happens, the mind begins to see something that it previously avoided: pain. Because as much as we seek peace, there are times when pain becomes inevitable. Situations that no one would like to live, losses that cannot be explained, feelings that human words cannot reach. And in those moments, many believe that peace has completely disappeared. But that's exactly where something deeper can be born. There are pains that cannot be solved with advice, nor with quick answers. These are experiences that touch the soul so intensely that everything that was superficial loses its meaning. And it is in this place that God reveals himself in a different way, not only as someone who solves problems, but as someone who is present in the midst of them. Job lived this in an extreme way. He lost everything: assets, family, health, stability. Everything that gave meaning to his life was suddenly torn away. And in the midst of this scenario, he faced not only pain, but also silence, misunderstanding, loneliness. But something extraordinary happened in the midst of this suffering. At Job 42:5 he states, "I once knew you just by hearing, but now my eyes see you." This reveals that even in pain there was an encounter. Even in suffering there was revelation. Something that was once distant has become intimate. Something that was once just knowledge has become experience. This completely changes the way we see pain, because it is no longer just suffering, and it also becomes a path. Not a desired path, but a path where God can reveal himself in a deeper way than at any other time. 2 Corinthians 1:3-4 declares, "God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulations, not in some, in all of them." This means that there is no pain that is beyond God's reach. There is no tear that he does not see. There is no wound that he cannot touch. And when that consolation begins to be experienced, something changes within the mind. The pain may continue for a while, but it no longer dominates everything. There is a presence in the middle of it. There is silent care. There is a peace that cannot be explained, but which begins to sustain. Maybe you're living something like that right now. A pain that no one fully understands, a difficult moment, a weight that seems too great. But this message came to you for a reason. Because even in that place, God can make himself present in a way that you have not yet experienced. And if something inside you has been touched now, write in the comments, God has chosen me. Not as just any phrase, but as a statement that even in pain, there is a purpose being built, and a peace being generated in the depths of your soul. And when this consolation begins to touch the deepest areas of the soul, something even more powerful can happen. Not just a momentary healing, not just a passing relief, but a complete transformation. Because true peace doesn't just come from adjusting some parts of life. It is born when something new is generated within you. Many people try to find peace by changing circumstances, solving external problems, reorganizing life around them. But even so, they feel that something is still out of place. This happens because the change that God proposes does not start from the outside, it starts in the countryside. The story of Saul, who later became Paul, reveals this in a striking way. He was not someone lost without direction. He had convictions, he had zeal, he had an active life. But at the same time, it was completely out of line with God's purpose, until a real encounter happened, and everything changed. It wasn't a superficial change. It wasn't just an adaptation of behavior. It was something radical, profound, irreversible. The way of thinking has changed. The way of living has changed. The identity has changed. And that's exactly what it's written in 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old things have passed away. It doesn't say that some things have been adjusted. He says that everything has become new. This is the key that many still do not understand. Peace doesn't come from trying to fix a tired mind. It comes from receiving a new nature. Because as long as the mind is stuck in the old way of thinking, the old patterns, the old wounds, there is always internal conflict. But when something new is generated, everything starts to line up. Ezekiel 36:26 states, I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. This is not a metaphor, it is a spiritual promise. God is not only interested in relieving what you feel, he wants to transform who you are. And when this transformation begins, the mind starts to function differently. Old thoughts lose strength. Reactions change. What used to generate unrest no longer has the same impact. There is a new base, a new way of seeing, a new way of living. Maybe you've tried to change some things in your life and failed. Perhaps he felt that no matter how hard he tried, he always returned to the same place. But the transformation that God offers does not depend only on your effort. It begins when you allow him to do something new within you. And when that happens, peace is no longer something you seek, and it becomes something that is part of who you have become. Maybe you've been waiting for a change for a long time, something that really makes a difference, something that goes beyond the superficial. And this message may be paving just that path. Stay until the end, because there is still something that can touch the root of all this and definitively transform what is inside you. And when this inner transformation begins to happen, something very natural arises within the human heart. The desire to be sure, to know if you are really on the right path, to understand if what is being lived comes from God or not. Because even with faith, even with change, there are still times when the mind seeks confirmation, and that's not weakness, it is humanity. God knows this need. He knows that in many moments the heart needs signs, clearer direction, something that brings security in the midst of decisions. And contrary to what many think, he does not ignore this. Gideon experienced exactly this kind of situation. He received a direction from God that seemed too big, out of logic, hard to believe. And instead of pretending to be sure he wasn't, he was sincere. At Judges 6:17 he said, "If indeed I can count on your favor, give me a sign." This shows that God does not reject a heart that seeks confirmation. He responds patiently. And the most impressive thing is that God confirmed it. Not just once, but in clear, specific, personal ways. This reveals something important. God does not want you to walk lost, full of doubt, without direction. He wants you to have security on the way, but there is a balance that needs to be understood, because signs are no substitute for faith. They confirm what God is already building within you. When the mind learns to discern this, it no longer lives in confusion, nor is it dependent on signs all the time. It becomes stable. Psalm 119:105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet." This shows that God illuminates the way step by step. He does not always reveal everything at once, but he always gives enough light for the next step, and that is already direction. Maybe you're in a moment where you need an answer, a confirmation, a signal that brings clarity. But something important needs to be guarded. God has already begun to speak. Often through small things, details, impressions, words that are repeated, doors that open or close. And when you start paying attention to that, something changes. The mind ceases to be anxious for big signs and begins to recognize the direction in God's small movements. And that brings a different peace, a peace that comes from balanced trust between faith and confirmation. And maybe this message that you're hearing right now is already one of those confirmations, something that connects with what you have been experiencing, something that silently answers what you were questioning. If this makes sense to you, don't ignore it. Enjoy this moment. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your like. Because when you do that, you don't just strengthen that message in you, but it allows her to reach out to others who are also seeking direction and need to recognize the signs of God in their lives. And when you begin to discern God's signs and walk more clearly, something even deeper unfolds. Peace is no longer just something you seek for yourself and starts to expand through you. Because there is a level of spiritual maturity where the mind is no longer focused only on its own needs, but begins to position itself also for others. This is the place of intercession, a place that many do not fully understand, but which carries immense spiritual power. Interceding is not just praying, it is to put oneself in the breach. It is to carry someone's need in one's heart. It is to stand before God with purpose and responsibility. Moises lived this intensely. There were times when the people failed, went astray, made wrong decisions, and in that scenario, God revealed the gravity of the situation. But Moses did not move away. He did not remain silent. He did not think only of himself. He interceded. He put himself between the problem and the answer. Exodus 32:14 says, "Then the Lord gave up the evil that he had threatened to bring upon the people." This reveals something profound. Intercession has real power. It is not just a symbolic gesture. It is a spiritual action that moves situations, that generates changes, that alters paths. And when one begins to live this, the mind enters a new level of peace, because it stops revolving only around itself. It expands, it gets stronger, it finds purpose in something bigger. Intercession takes the focus off fear, anxiety, excessive worry, and directs it to an active spiritual positioning. 1 Timothy 2:1 clearly reinforces this. First of all, I recommend that supplications, prayers, intercessions be made. First of all, this shows priority. It shows that there is a call to this kind of life, an invitation to participate in something greater than just reality itself. And maybe you've never realized it, but there are times when God puts people in your heart. Names that come up, situations that come to mind, a different concern that appears without explanation. This is no coincidence. It can be a call to intercession, and when you respond to that, something changes inside you. The mind is strengthened, the heart is aligned, and a different peace begins to grow. Not a passive peace, but an active peace, which is born of purpose, of connection, of communion with God. Because when you intercede, you're not just asking, you're participating. He's positioning himself spiritually. He is living something that goes beyond the visible. And in that place, the mind finds a deep balance, because she understands that she is not isolated, that she is part of something bigger, that she can be an instrument in the hands of God. And this brings a peace that does not depend on circumstances, but from the awareness that you are exactly where you should be, doing what you were called to do. And when intercession becomes part of your life, something inside you begins to strengthen in a way that goes beyond words, because there is a spiritual authority being built. And it is exactly this authority that begins to confront one of the quietest and most destructive forces of the mind: fear. Fear doesn't need much to act. Sometimes it comes as a simple thought, a small doubt, a seemingly harmless insecurity. But when he is not confronted, he grows. It paralyzes decisions, weakens attitudes, distorts reality, and tries to dominate the mind little by little. And many believe that overcoming fear is never feeling it, but this is not true. Courage is not born from the absence of fear. It is born from the consciousness of those in control, and this is exactly what David demonstrated before Goliath. While everyone saw an impossible giant, while fear dominated an entire army, David positioned himself differently, not because he didn't feel the weight of the situation, but because he knew who was with him. In 1 Samuel 17:45, he declares, "You come against me with a sword, but I go against you in the name of the Lord." This phrase reveals authority. It's not arrogance, it's not self-confidence. It is spiritual awareness. It is knowing that there is a greater power sustaining each step. And that's what changes everything, because when you understand that God is with you, fear loses its right to dominate you. He may even try to appear, but he no longer finds space to rule his mind. There is a firmness that begins to take hold, a security that does not depend on circumstances. 2 Timothy 1:7 states, "God has given us not a spirit of fear, but of power." This means that fear does not come from God, and if it doesn't come from Him, you don't have to accept it. You can confront it, you can reject it, you can position yourself differently. Perhaps there are areas of your life where fear is still present, decisions you avoid, steps you postpone, thoughts that limit you. But from the moment you start assuming that spiritual authority, something changes. The chains begin to break, the mind begins to free itself. And this does not happen automatically. It is a position. It is a daily choice not to bow to fear, but to stand up in faith, of not only listening to the voice of insecurity, but of remembering who is in control of everything. And when that awareness becomes real within you, the mind finds a new level of stability, not because the challenges have disappeared, but because fear no longer rules. Few people will fully understand what is being revealed here. But if you've made it this far, there's a reason. Continue until the end, because what is yet to be revealed can further strengthen this authority within you and transform once and for all the way you face everything in your life. And when this spiritual authority begins to establish itself within you, there is an even more decisive step that defines whether or not this peace will remain: obedience. Because it is not enough to hear the voice of God, it is not enough to recognize the direction, it is not enough to feel the touch. It is necessary to align life with what has been revealed. Many concerns that seem to have no explanation are actually born from an internal misalignment. The person knows what he needs to do, feels the direction, but resists. And this resistance creates a silent conflict within the mind, a weight that is not visible, but that prevents peace from being completely established. Jonas lived exactly that. He received clear direction from God, a specific calling, but he decided to run away. And at first it seemed like just a choice, but it quickly turned into unrest, confusion, a path full of turbulence. Because when there is disobedience, peace begins to drift away. It was not God who was far away. It was Jonas who was out of alignment, and this misalignment generated consequences: storm, fear, despair. Until, at the deepest point, when there was no more strength, something changed inside him. In Jonah 2:7 it is written, "When my life was extinguished, I remembered you, Lord." This moment marks the return, not just a superficial regret, but a realignment. And it is at this point that peace begins to return, because obedience is not just a requirement, it is a path of restoration. Deuteronomy 28:1 states, "If you faithfully obey the Lord will exalt you." This reveals a clear spiritual principle: obedience breeds alignment, and alignment breeds peace. When you walk in the right direction, even if there are challenges, there is an inner harmony that sustains you. Maybe today there is something inside you that already knows what needs to be done. A decision that was postponed, a path that was avoided, a direction that was ignored. And even if everything seems normal on the outside, inside there is an uneasiness that is not easily explained. But when you decide to obey, something changes immediately. Not because everything around you is resolved at the same time, but because inside you the conflict ends, the mind aligns, the heart quiets down, and a deep peace begins to take the place of tension. Obedience is not loss, it is freedom. It is to leave a place of resistance and enter a place of flow, where life begins to walk with more lightness, more clarity, more meaning. And when you live like that, the mind stops fighting against itself. It finds harmony, it finds direction, it finds rest, because it's aligned with what really underpins everything. And when obedience begins to align everything within you, something even deeper needs to be established so that this peace is not just momentary, but constant. Because many experience moments with God, feel the presence, live remarkable experiences. But then they go back to a disconnected routine, and the peace begins to waver again. The truth is that the mind at peace is not sustained by isolated encounters, but by a continuous journey. It's not just about intense spiritual moments, but about a daily, constant, simple, and deep life in the presence of God. Enoch lived just that. The Bible does not describe great public deeds. It does not highlight extraordinary miracles, but it does reveal something far more powerful. In Genesis 5:24 it is written, "Enoch walked with God, and he was no longer found, for God had caught him away." This shows a whole life marked by communion. It wasn't something accidental. It was a lifestyle. Walking with God is more than praying at specific times. It is to maintain a constant awareness of His presence. It is to bring God to simple decisions, to thoughts, to everyday life. It is living in a connected way, not only in special situations, but in every detail of life. And when this practice becomes real, something begins to change profoundly. The mind ceases to oscillate between moments of peace and moments of restlessness, and begins to remain stable, because it no longer depends on specific spiritual circumstances, but of a continuous connection. Galatians 5:25 says, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit." This reveals that it is not enough to just experiment. It is necessary to continue. It's a daily walk, one step at a time, a constant choice to stay connected. Perhaps what has been missing until today are not experiences with God, but continuity. Moments happened, feelings came, but there was no constancy. And without constancy, the mind gets lost again, gets agitated again, disconnects again. But when you start living that way, something stabilizes inside you. God's presence ceases to be something you seek occasionally and becomes something you carry. And that changes everything. The mind becomes lighter, clearer, firmer. Thoughts align, decisions become safer, and peace is no longer something distant and becomes a constant reality. And perhaps, throughout all of this that you have heard so far, something has been confirmed within you. If this message is bringing answers you needed, write in the comments, "I trust in God's action," because this simple statement can mark the beginning of a deeper, more constant journey, and completely transformative. And when that continuous presence starts to be a part of your life, there is something that becomes essential to sustain all of this over time: perseverance. Because the truth is that not every day will be marked by intense emotions, deep experiences, or visible signs. There will be ordinary, silent, seemingly equal days where nothing extraordinary happens. And it is exactly on these days that peace is built in a more solid way. Many people get discouraged at this point. They start well, connect, feel, get involved. But when they don't see immediate results, when they don't see rapid changes, they begin to weaken. The mind starts to question, to doubt, to lose focus, and without realizing it, what was being built begins to unravel. But the mind at peace is not formed by isolated moments of faith. It is built on constancy. It is the daily decision to continue, even when there is no emotion. It is to remain firm, even when there are no signs. It's about continuing to walk, even when everything seems slow. Noah lived exactly this reality. God gave him a clear direction: build an ark. But there was a detail. It had never rained like that before. There was no reference. There was no visible confirmation. There was no support around. Just one word. And yet, he kept going. Day after day, year after year, he continued to do what God had commanded. Without haste, without giving up, without getting carried away by doubts. And Genesis 6:22 sums it up powerfully. Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. This silent fidelity built something much bigger than an ark. He built a firm, stable, unshakable mind. Because when you learn to stay, you stop relying on fleeting emotions. His peace no longer fluctuates according to the day, according to what he feels or what he sees. Hebrews 10:36 states, "You must endure, so that when you have done God's will, you may receive what he has promised." This shows that there is a time between the promise and the fulfillment, and this time is not empty. It is a process. A place where the mind is strengthened, where faith is matured, where peace becomes deeper. Maybe today you are exactly in that period, doing what is right, seeking God, trying to stay, but without seeing major changes yet. And this can generate doubts, it can generate fatigue. But that's exactly where perseverance becomes essential. Because when you continue, even without seeing, something is being formed within you. Something that cannot be shaken easily, something that resists time, circumstances, uncertainties. And little by little, you realize that peace is not only in the good times. She is on the constant walk, in the daily commitment, in the silent fidelity that sustains everything. And it is in this place that the mind finds a different rest. A rest that does not depend on what happens around you, but on the certainty that you are staying exactly where you should be. And when perseverance begins to sustain your walk, there is an even deeper adjustment that needs to happen within you. Something silent, but extremely powerful, that defines whether this peace will remain light or if it will become heavy again. That adjustment is humility. Because often the mind gets agitated, not because of what's going on around, but because of what's being fed inside. The need to control everything, to be right, to be recognized, to compare oneself with others. All of this creates an invisible weight, a constant effort to maintain an image, to prove something, not to appear weak. And that is tiring. Pride doesn't come across as obvious most of the time. He manifests himself in detail, in the difficulty of giving in the resistance to listening, in the need to always have control of the situation. And the more it grows, the more the mind becomes heavy, restless, overloaded. But true peace begins to blossom when that weight is removed. And this happens through humility, not as a weakness, but as a spiritual strength. A decision not to need to prove anything, not to need to compete, not to need to carry what was not made for you to carry. Jesus showed this clearly in one of the most remarkable moments. Even though he was a master, a Lord, he placed himself to wash the feet of the disciples. A simple attitude, but loaded with meaning. In John 13:14, he says, "If I, Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." This reveals that greatness in the kingdom of God is not in elevating oneself above others, but in placing oneself in a position of service. And when that mindset starts to come inside you, something changes profoundly. The comparison loses strength. The competition no longer makes sense. The need for recognition begins to disappear. And with that, the mind becomes lighter, because she no longer needs to support a weight that is not necessary. She rests. James 4:6 states, "God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." This shows that humility doesn't just bring lightness, it attracts grace. And this grace sustains, strengthens, balances. Perhaps without realizing it, you have carried this weight for too long, trying to control, trying to prove, trying to keep everything under control. But the peace you seek is not in this place. It is in the surrender, in the dependence, in the simplicity of those who trust fully in God. And when you start living like that, the mind finds a different rest. A rest that doesn't come from having everything under control, but of knowing that you don't need to have it, because God is in control. And in this place, everything becomes lighter, everything becomes clearer, and peace begins to flow naturally, without effort, without pressure, only as a result of a heart that has finally learned to rest. And when humility begins to lighten the weight of the mind, making room to depend more on God than on oneself, a new key reveals itself in a silent but extremely powerful way. Gratitude. Because it is not enough just to take the weight of pride off. It is necessary to fill the heart with something that sustains lightness. And that's exactly what gratitude does. The human mind has a natural tendency to focus on what is missing, on what has not yet happened, on what could be better. And when this pattern sets in, restlessness begins to grow. It always seems that something is incomplete. There is always a sense of insufficiency, and peace is being replaced by a constant search for more. But gratitude completely changes this perspective. She does not ignore the difficulties, does not deny the challenges, but chooses to look at what has already been given. And when that happens, the mind finds a new balance. Paul lived this impressively, even in prison, in difficult conditions, without comfort, without freedom. He chose to be grateful. This makes no sense to human logic, but it reveals a deep spiritual level. In 1 Thessalonians 5:18 it is written, "Give thanks in all circumstances," not just the good ones, in all of them. This shows that gratitude does not depend on what is happening around you. It is born of an inner decision. It is a conscious choice to recognize that, even in the midst of difficulties, there are still reasons to be grateful. And when this practice begins to be part of life, something changes inside the mind. He stops clinging to what is missing and begins to value what already exists. Little things gain meaning. Details that previously went unnoticed are beginning to be recognized, and this generates a sense of peace, contentment, stability. Psalm 103:2 declares, "Let the Lord bless my soul, and forget none of his blessings." This reveals something important. The mind needs to be remembered, because if there is no intention, he tends to forget what God has already done. Maybe today you are focused on something that has not yet happened, on an answer that has not yet come, on a situation that has not yet been resolved. And this has taken up too much space within you. But when you start looking at what you've already received, something fits. Gratitude doesn't just change what you see, it changes how you feel. It brings lightness, it brings serenity, it brings a peace that does not depend on perfection around it. And little by little, the mind becomes more stable, calmer, more aligned. And when you live like this, you realize that peace is not only in the future, it can be lived now, in the present, through a heart that learns to recognize what God has already done. In the next few moments, something even deeper will be revealed, something that can definitely change the way you see each situation in your life. Stay, because what comes next may be just the sign you needed to live that peace fully. And when gratitude begins to stabilize the mind, bringing lightness to the heart, an essential need arises to sustain this peace in day-to-day decisions. Wisdom. Because it's not just the big moments that define peace, but mostly the choices you make along the way. Many concerns that people carry do not only come from unexpected problems, but of misdirected decisions, paths chosen without clarity, attitudes taken on impulse, choices based only on emotion. And then the consequences arrive, bringing confusion, regret, and a weight that could have been avoided. That is why divine wisdom becomes indispensable, because it doesn't just show you what to do, it protects you from what you shouldn't do. It works as a safe direction in the midst of so many options, preventing the mind from getting lost in paths that seem good, but that generate chaos. Solomon understood this deeply. When he had the opportunity to ask for anything, he did not choose riches, nor power, nor recognition. He asked for something much more valuable. At 1 Kings 3:9, he said, "Give your servant a heart full of discernment." He knew that with wisdom, all other things would be handled in the right way. And this reveals a powerful principle. Peace is not just about avoiding problems, it is in making choices that are in line with God's will. Because when you decide wisely, you avoid unnecessary conflicts, avoid confusing paths, avoid pain that could be prevented. James 3:17 describes this wisdom clearly. The wisdom that comes from above is pure, peaceable, lovable. This means that when a decision comes from God, it carries peace. Even if it is challenging, even if it requires courage, there is an inner tranquility that confirms that this is the right path. Maybe today you are facing important decisions, choices that seem difficult, paths that generate doubts, situations that require positioning, and the natural tendency is to try to solve everything quickly, with only one's own logic. But it is exactly at this point that many get lost, because divine wisdom demands a pause. It requires searching, it requires sensitivity to listen before acting. And when you start living like that, something changes completely. The mind stops acting on impulse and starts responding with direction. And that brings peace, because you no longer live with the tension of trying to get it right on your own. There is a trust that God is directing every step, every decision, every choice. And little by little, you realize that wisdom doesn't just solve situations, it builds a lighter, safer, more aligned life. A life where the mind does not live in constant doubt, but walks with clarity and tranquility. And it is in this place that peace is strengthened even more, because each decision is guided, protected, and sustained by something much greater than human understanding itself. And when wisdom begins to guide your decisions, leading your steps more clearly, there is an even deeper layer that defines the quality of that peace, the state of the heart. Because there is no point in making correct decisions on the outside if on the inside there is still division, conflict, misaligned intentions. The mind may try to organize itself, but if the heart is divided, peace will never be complete. A split mind is a restless mind. It is when thoughts, desires, and attitudes do not go in the same direction. That's when there's a silent internal struggle, one part wanting to do the right thing, while another still clings to what does not edify. And this division generates noise, generates weight, generates constant instability. David understood this deeply. He didn't just ask for external changes, he didn't just ask for deliverance. He went straight to the root. In Psalm 51:10 he cries out, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." This reveals that he understood that true transformation had to begin within. Purity of heart does not mean perfection. It means alignment. It means living with integrity, where thoughts, intentions, and actions go together. It is when there is no duplicity, there are no masks, there is no life divided between what is shown and what is really lived. And when that alignment starts to happen, something changes profoundly in the mind. The internal noise decreases, the confusion loses space, that feeling of constant conflict begins to fade, because now there is a unity, a coherence that brings stability. Matthew 5:8 declares, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." This shows that purity not only brings peace, it brings vision. When the heart is clean, the mind sees more clearly. Decisions become firmer, the direction becomes more evident. Maybe what's taking away your peace today isn't something external, but something internal. Thoughts that don't align, intentions that generate doubt, choices that create conflict within you. And this, little by little, steals tranquility. But when you allow God to work in that area, when you seek that aligned heart, something starts to adjust. Not forcefully, but naturally. The mind begins to rest because there is no longer a constant internal struggle. And this peace is different. It doesn't just depend on what you do, it is born from who you have become on the inside. An aligned heart generates a peaceful mind. A life of integrity generates consistent peace. And it is in this place that everything begins to flow more lightly. No divisions, no hidden conflicts, no internal noises. Just a steady mind, a clean heart, and a peace that endures. And when this purity begins to align the interior, eliminating the silent conflicts of the mind, something even more powerful begins to occupy this space. Spiritual joy. Not an ordinary, fleeting joy, dependent on good times, but a joy that is born of connection with God and that sustains the mind even when everything around seems difficult. Because the truth is that sadness is part of life. There are heavy days, unexpected news, moments when the heart is broken, but the danger is not in feeling sadness. It is in allowing it to turn into despair. And it is precisely at this point that the joy of the Lord becomes essential. Nehemiah stated something that goes beyond a simple motivational phrase. In Nehemiah 8:10 it is written, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." This means that this joy is not just a feeling. It is a spiritual force, something that sustains, that lifts, that keeps the mind steady when everything seems to want to overthrow. This joy does not depend on external circumstances. It doesn't need everything to be perfect to exist. It is born from a deeper place, of the certainty that God is present, that He remains in control, that there is a purpose being carried out even when it is not visible. Jesus confirmed this at John 15:11. "I have spoken these words to you, that my joy may be in you." Notice, it is not just any joy. It is His joy. A joy that is not easily shaken, that does not disappear with difficulties, that is not broken by pressures. And when that joy begins to dwell within you, something changes in your mind. Sadness may even knock on the door, but it does not find room to dominate. Negative thoughts may even arise, but they do not take root. There is an inner force that sustains, that balances, that prevents falling. Perhaps today you are facing more difficult days, times when the mood seems to have subsided, when the mind tries to lean towards discouragement. But this joy is not far away. It can be accessed, not as something forced, but as a presence that you allow to enter. And little by little, you begin to realize that, even for no apparent reason, there is a lightness emerging. A silent force. A peace that is mixed with a deep joy, which needs no explanation. And that joy begins to protect your mind. It prevents thoughts from becoming too heavy, emotions from becoming uncontrolled. It sustains you from the inside, even when there are still challenges on the outside. And it is at this point that the mind finds a new level of stability. Not only because of the absence of conflict, but because of the presence of a living force that sustains everything. By the end of this video, you can experience something even deeper. A connection that goes beyond words, a presence that transforms from the inside out. Stay, because what is being built within you can reach a level that you have never experienced before. And when this joy begins to sustain the mind, bringing strength even in difficult days, one of the greatest challenges of the spiritual life arises. Learn to wait. Because it is in waiting that many get lost, it is in waiting that the mind is agitated, that thoughts accelerate, that anxiety tries to take control. Waiting is not easy, especially when there is a deep desire, a constant prayer, something that you have put before God repeatedly. Time passes, the days go by, and the answer does not seem to arrive. And in the meantime, the mind begins to question, begins to restless, begins to wear out. But waiting, when it is aligned with God, is not wasted time. It's a process, a place where something is being worked on inside you, even if nothing apparent is happening on the outside. Anna lived exactly that. She carried a deep desire in her heart, something that for her was impossible to ignore. Year after year, she prayed, wept, searched, and even without an immediate response, she did not give up. At 1 Samuel 1:27 she states, "For this child I prayed." This phrase carries perseverance, faith, constancy. Her wait was not empty, it was full of surrender. And it was in this process that something inside her was strengthened, not only desire, but faith. Not just prayer, but trust. Isaiah 40:31 reveals what happens at this time. But those who hope in the Lord renew their strength. Notice, it does not say that they stand still or weaken. He says that they are renewed. This means that waiting, when lived in the right way, does not wear out. Strengthen. The problem is when waiting is disconnected from faith, when the mind starts trying to solve everything on its own, when anxiety takes place, when the heart loses confidence. Then yes, time becomes heavy. But when you learn to wait on God, something changes. The mind slows down, the heart calms down. There is a quiet confidence that even if it hasn't happened yet, it's already being prepared. Maybe you're in that place right now, waiting for an answer, a change, a sign, and this has stirred their thoughts, their emotions. But that time is not empty. God is at work, even if you don't see it yet. And when you understand this, waiting stops being a burden and becomes a process of growth. A place where your mind is strengthened, where your faith matures, where your peace deepens. Nothing in this life happens without a purpose, and if that word has come to you now, there is something being confirmed within you. If you feel this, write in the comments, "I believe, Lord." Because that simple statement can mark the beginning of a new way of waiting, with peace, with confidence, and with a faith that is not shaken. After all that has been revealed, it is clear that the peace you seek is not far away, nor hidden. It is available the moment the heart decides to trust God completely. Everything that has been built so far points to this place of surrender, where the mind stops fighting alone and begins to rest in His presence. Waiting, faith, transformation, trust. Each step of this journey was not just learning, it was an invitation, a call to get out of human control and into divine dependence, because it is in this place that true peace begins to be experienced, not as a theory, but as a living reality within you. And that promise continues to echo strongly. In Jeremiah 33:3 it is written, "Call to me, and I will answer." This means that God is not distant, He is not silent, He is not indifferent. He is available, ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to bring peace. Now, this is the time to silence everything around, to put aside distractions, racing thoughts, worries that try to take up space. It is time to open your heart with sincerity, without reservations, without fear. Let's pray together, putting before God everything that has been touched so far. Trust, because He is listening, and the peace you need begins to be established now. Beloved Father, your word assures us that your presence is a refuge and rest for the weary mind. And it is with this confidence that we now stand before you, opening our hearts sincerely and deeply. Lord, we thank you for all that has been revealed so far, for every teaching, for every truth that has reached the soul, for every direction that has brought light to confused thoughts. Thank you that the Lord does not leave us lost, but guides us with love, patience and fidelity, showing us that the peace we seek so much is not far away, but available in you. At this time, Father, we cry out for strength and wisdom. It strengthens each person who is praying now, renews the tired mind, gives clarity for difficult decisions, and courage to live everything that has been learned. May each word received not only remain in the memory, but descend to the heart and become a daily practice, in aligned choices, in a life guided by your Spirit. Lord, look at every need now presented. You know the pains that no one sees, the thoughts that disturb in the night, the worries that have taken away peace. It touches those who are sick, bringing healing to the body and soul. It visits families in need of restoration, bringing reconciliation, love, and unity. It opens doors for those facing financial difficulties, bringing provision and direction. Strengthen those who are spiritually weak, rekindling faith, renewing hope, and bringing back the joy that comes from you. Now, in silence, every heart opens before you. Every request, every tear, every desire is placed in your hands. The Lord knows everything, even that which has not been spoken in words, and we know that you are listening. Father, we have completely surrendered our lives to you. We surrender our fears, our plans, our dreams, and also our uncertainties. We trust that your will is perfect and that you are in control of all things. Teach us to rest, to trust, to wait, and to walk in faith, knowing that every step is being guided by you. May your peace, that which surpasses all understanding, now invade every mind and every heart, bringing balance, serenity, and security. As it is written in Isaiah 41:10, "Fear not, for I am with thee." May this truth come alive within each one, dispelling all fear and bringing deep rest. We declare victory over all restlessness, over all negative thoughts, over all anxiety. And we receive by faith a firm, protected, and peaceful mind. In Jesus' name, may this transformation be real, constant, and lasting. Amen. If this prayer has found your heart, write in the comments, Amen, as an act of faith and surrender before God. After everything you have experienced so far, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The peace you seek is not outside, it begins within, when your mind aligns with God. Every revealed teaching, every biblical story, every word of Jesus showed that there is a real, accessible, and transformative way to live with a peaceful mind. It's not about the absence of problems, but about the presence of God. It's not about controlling everything, but about trusting the one who is in control of everything. And if you've made it this far, understand something clearly. This message is for you. God has chosen you to hear this today because He knows your struggles, your quietest thoughts, and what you can't even explain. The question that remains now is, will you continue to live the same way, or will you decide to apply these principles and allow God to transform your mind from the inside out? I'm very happy that we're together so far, really. There's something special going on in that connection, and you're a part of it. I want to invite you, with great affection, to leave your like and subscribe to the channel, if you haven't already, because it helps this message to reach more people who also need this peace. But more than that, I want to meet you. Comment below where you are watching, and if you feel in your heart, share a little of what you are experiencing. It can be a struggle, a prayer request, or even a testimony. We're building something here together, a chain of real faith, where every story matters, and yours matters a lot too. And it doesn't stop here, because this journey is just beginning. In the next video, we'll dive even deeper into something that can completely transform your spiritual walk, revealing how to live in God's presence, practically and steadily, every day. There is a next step waiting for you, something that will complement everything you have just heard and take your faith to a new level. Don't ignore it. Allow God to continue speaking to your heart. Take the next step on this journey by watching the next video that will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to learn how to live in God's presence and experience the fullness of His plans. Don't stop here, because God still has much more to speak to you. Always remember, God is greater than any attack. Trust Him, and He will do infinitely more than you can imagine. May God bless your life, and I'll wait for you in the next video.